Today, many Americans are taking a look, are rediscovering the advantages of walkable historic urban communities. With this trend, existing older homes are being remodeled and adapted to meet the lifestyles of today's families. In this episode of Renovate Louisville, we'll take a look at one homeowner's quest to merge an historic residential home with modern architecture. Everything about this house highlights the Victorian era. From the ornamental front to a formal sitting room, this structure is a true ambassador of the architectural style of the 19th century. This, of course, is typical of what you might find in areas like Old Louisville or Cherokee Triangle.
The house behind me is one that dates to the late 19th century. It was probably built around 1890 or so, and it features classical styling and characteristics. It's a 2.5-story masonry townhouse style. You'll notice that it's really vertical. It's got a very strong emphasis that is more vertical than some of the houses you see in the district.
The Industrial Revolution made it possible for new materials and new technologies to create not only a house to live in, but revolutionary designs as well. The Industrial Revolution, with machine products that were produced in masses, prompted a new style of living and greater quality of life. Lining the streets of Cherokee Triangle, one can see architectural details in the designs that had not been seen in residential homes in America until this point. From the early 1900s, Gothic, Victorian, Italianate, and various eclectic design elements were reflected in this time period. Walking through a home like this one is like looking at a time capsule, with the design of the house giving insight into life in the early 1900s.
Historic preservation districts are important to any community because they help preserve neighborhoods and commercial areas that reflect periods of time in the development of the community. A place like Cherokee Triangle shows how the city was moving towards the east from downtown in the late 19th century and with the development of the streetcar.
Someone has determined that these are really important buildings and that they are really worthy of a lot of care and attention. And I think having people aware of new construction, for example, that's taking place in districts and the kind of concern that people have about that is only very positive, I think, in terms of benefiting the overall preservation effort.
Preservation districts are extremely important to any community because that keeps the older housing stock revived and revitalized when it becomes a very valuable resource for the community as a whole.
Historic preservation districts such as the Cherokee Triangle have largely kept these homes intact as they were, and for good reason. It's impossible not to romanticize this era, even if only by looking at the art and the architectural design elements left standing. Any of these homes, rich in culture and history, would make a great home to live in. Or would they? Even if one isn't a fan of classic architecture, it is hard to argue that on the outside, the design details and craftsmanship is impressive. But like many things, nothing is perfect, and usable interior space can be a challenge in these historic homes.
I think buildings like this this period are certainly reflective of a certain way of living, and lifestyles change and how people use the spaces, and so we really wanted to create an environment that would be more responsive to how our clients actually want to live.
The very essence that gives these houses their charm and character is exactly the reason living in one can be a challenge. Our lifestyles have changed radically from just 2 decades ago, let alone over 100 years ago. True to their nature of being historic, these buildings were made for people with different priorities in their lifestyles, and these are dramatically different from the way we live in our world today. The front facades of some of these houses are designed like a wedding cake, with ornamental designs, classic columns which look like they were once part of a Greek temple, decorative woodworking around the windows all tied together by a curtain of masonry. If you were living when this house was built, a prominent facade created a formal entry for guests, which was important for striking a good impression. The back area, however, was designed to support service requirements for the home, be it housekeeping or otherwise. The largest spaces that you might find in one of these homes were the dining room or formal living room. In the 19th century, these spaces weren't considered the way they are now. The idea of having something as common as 2 sinks and a single bathroom would have been absurd to someone living in this time. Kitchens were another matter entirely. No one had toaster ovens or juicers or any electrical appliances in general. Again, large space for cooking purposes weren't needed. Even closet space was limited, as many used dressers and large-scale furniture instead. This was ideal for the 19th century, sure, but for life today in the 21st century, things are very different. A 21st century family living in a 19th century home is challenging simply because the expectations of a home have changed so dramatically over the years. So how can a family today make use of a historic home such as this one? Even historic homes are given a renaissance with additions being made that allow us to rethink 19th century architecture entirely. And that's exactly what the homeowner, David Kaplan, has decided to do. And after months of planning and construction, he's added an addition to his home.
We love living in a historic home, and I don't think we would have it any other way. But we did want to adapt the space to our lifestyle and get some, modern components in there that people expect in the 21st century. So I became interested in the idea of marrying those two things, the contemporary with the historic. This contractor was experienced in that area and involved carpenter tailor in the process, and it was just a good fit.
The way people live today, I think, has changed, and so the program was to add a family room and a new kitchen on the first floor and then a new master bedroom, and to allow the existing house to accommodate the children through using some of the existing spaces in the house and adding some bathrooms. And so that was what we attempted to do in terms of program.
Before we did this renovation, the house was more compartmentalized, and the kitchen was really separate from the areas in the house that we lived in.
Few of us have servants or maids. We keep much more in our closets than just clothes, and kitchens have become a central place for our families to come together. We just don't use dining rooms like we used to.
We wound up spending a lot of our time in the dining room, and that was functioning kind of as an office space as well, where you'd pick up your laptop and work from the dining room table. So we weren't necessarily using spaces the way they were originally intended.
When families are eating out at restaurants or getting a quick meal before it's off to the next event, the kitchen is a multi-purpose space where we not only cook and eat our food, but it also functions as a communication center, office, and entertainment space.
All of the spaces needed to have an interconnectability so that there could be a relationship between the new bedroom and the living space and kitchen, so they could have a visual and an audio connection to that space, and as well view the yard which we're sitting in from all of those spaces. So there had to be kind of that connectivity where it weren't separate spaces but really cordoned off spaces within one larger volume.
Because these homes are protected by historic preservation districts, it's not as if one could simply demolish these buildings and begin anew. And looking at the way they do, grand in appearance and romantic in charm, who would want to? The architectural firm behind the project, Carpenter Taylor, spent time working with the Cherokee Triangle Preservation District to ensure any alterations were appropriate.
Carpenter Taylor then presented us with a design that they felt was true to the historic history of the house, but also met some of our needs from a lifestyle standpoint, and we fell in love with the design right away.
I think that Louisville does have a certain distinctive charm, and I think really trying to preserve that charm while allowing buildings to evolve is an important part of the process. And so I think it's a very positive process from my perspective. I think you want changes to happen. I think that's part of preservation, but you want changes to happen in a way which is supportive and appropriate. Obviously changes have to take place, and so historic zoning, I think, is a way of really making certain that whatever happens in an appropriate and responsible way.
And now that the dust has settled over bringing a historic home into the modern age, what's the end result? At first glance, it may look a bit unusual, but after a moment, you begin to realize how fitting this addition truly is.
The Landmarks Commission bases its design guidelines stresses that when you're building something new to a historic building, that you want to make it a product of its own time. You don't want to mimic something that was already built that's significant and historic for its own reasons. So there's not, you want to make something that is its own style and reflects the period of time it was constructed in. So you want to make sure that you're sensitive to the actual dimensions of the historic house and not exceed those dimensions, not have something that's taller or wider or more massive in its character than what you have on the historic building.
Light was always very important. We wanted this addition to feel almost like a reverse negative of what the house was. The house, you know, has punched openings in it, as would be very appropriate for the time. And what we've done here is really reversed that and opened it up and made the actual space volumes inside sort of penetrate a glass wall to kind of take away that edge that we had on the existing house, which is the larger masonry elements. And that way, the spaces inside are allowed to flow out and in turn accept the exterior spaces in. So there's kind of that return between what bit of nature we have here in a more urban environment.
So the use of windows and use of light help us to create that illusion that the existing building is still there. You can see it visually. So the use of light and skylights and windows and so forth really help us achieve that kind of separation and that's kind of continuity between the old and the new.
Because the purpose and design of this addition was never to replicate the style of the mid-1900s, the new addition gives this historic structure exactly what it needs: space. The kitchen is larger, connecting to a living room. Large windows allow for natural lighting, and the lack of a second floor neutralizes the claustrophobic sensation found in many historic homes.
Now what we've got is a large casual living space that is connected to the kitchen, so I can be making dinner but talking to the kids or making dinner and watching TV. Another thing that we like is that we now have a master bathroom suite that we didn't have before off the master bedroom, and we are able to give both of our children their own bedroom. We bought immediately into the idea of orienting the house in the direction of the open side lot and having a lot of light pour in through glass windows and doors facing that direction.
The architects never attempted to fool anyone in believing the addition was part of the original building. Although there's nothing inherently wrong with making that attempt, it somehow takes away from the authentic nature of the house, kind of watering down the whole experience.
We wanted to honor the integrity of the existing building, which we think is very nice. And we felt that trying to design an addition that would look like a building would really compromise that.
We were very lucky with this project is the original fabric of the house. The whole fabric was really intact. It wasn't as if there was a whole bunch of infiltrations that had been done that really took away from that.
Even if the two designs are quite different in style, they're still complementary to each other and have a design dialogue between them. The idea was never to replicate rather than to accommodate life as we know it today. It doesn't take an individual long to see where the old meets the new. In fact, you could remove the addition and the original structure would largely be unchanged. And that's the beauty of what has happened here on Everett Avenue. Much like how nature adapts to a changing world around it, additions such as this only add to the historic nature of the building. We can see how life and society has changed just by looking at the contrast of architecture, acting as testament to the age they were created in, and opening up a new chapter of history.